Awesome. Well, thank you very much for sticking around. As you can see, there's a link and a hashtag on the screen behind me. If you go to slido.com, hashtag SwiftLDN, you can hashtag. That one. You can submit questions to the panel. You can also upvote and downvote, or just upvote questions that you would like us to answer. While you all tap away on your phones, the panel will just introduce themselves. I mentioned it before, my name's Yvette. I'm a developer at Navoda. We're a mobile agency and we're hiring. We write Swift, lots of Swift.
Hello, my name's Al. I'm a freelance iOS developer, so have been for a while, and been helping out here with Morgan, who's did an amazing disappearing act. So yeah, it's great. Well, my understanding was he's trying to seek political asylum in Scotland, but you know, we'll see.
Okay, I'm Joseph. I work at Pulse Live. We make sports apps and websites and things, and the Premier League app will soon be out from, which is our build, and we are hiring too. And there's other interesting projects in the work. So come and talk to me or email jobs@pulselive.com.
I'm Liam. I'm a contract iOS developer currently working at a company called Yubble. We're a social media startup. We are currently hot this week, according to Apple, in the UK. And yeah, hopefully we remain hot.
And I'm Dan. I'm the lead developer at a company called LiveDrive, who do cloud backup, cloud storage. I don't get to write too much Swift these days for my job, but I do a lot of it in my spare time.
Cool, and just to kick things off, I wanted to ask the panel, from the latest WWDC, what was your favourite video? What would you most recommend people watch?
I'll get in quickly, just in case someone steals mine. It's the one on Swift performance. Am I really loud? Ooh. It's quite intriguing, and it goes into depth how protocols and generics differ and the sort of consequences performance-wise. So I can't remember the number of the video, but I'm pretty sure it's called Swift Performance. It's cool.
Yep, that was a good one. I found the Core Data one. There's a lot of stuff changing there. So if you use Core Data, that one's definitely worth a watch. I know in some ways Core Data is the opposite of Swift because it's very much mutable global state that you're passing around in a very clever way with great tools, but it's still useful in some places, and it is changing quite a lot in iOS 10 and Swift 3. So.
Yeah, they're both a Swift performance one, and there's a value types and protocols one as well, which was really good. The server side, there's one on server-side Swift. I haven't really done any server-side coding, but I saw that, and there's some guys came on from IBM and made it look easy and interesting. So yeah, it was quite a nice one.
I haven't had a lot of time to watch them, to be honest. I watched one called Improving Existing Apps with Modern Best Practices, I think it was called. It didn't start great. They said, one of these new developments is dependency injection, and we should all start using that. So I don't know how much we should take note of that talk. Obviously, we need to do it, but it's been around for a while.
I really enjoyed the Swift-free API design guidelines. One thing, it was very well delivered, which I always find is a benefit with people with a sense of humour and good speaking. It also covered the grand renaming, which I think if anybody is going to be doing any Swift-free, which hopefully a lot of us, we do need to be aware of the changes that are coming to the API. Plus, the grand renaming is a really epic name, and I'm quite excited about it. Okay, let's have a look at the questions. So we have a question. Swift-free is coming. What do we need to do to be ready, apart from watch that WWDC video? Anyone got any thoughts on that?
Well, you can start writing your code in a Swift 3 style already, mostly. The compiler should be able to fix most of the things that you will need to change for Swift 3 anyway. So changing naming styles and things like that, a lot of that will be mostly done for you. but in terms of the grand renaming, you can obviously start writing your code that way now. Definitely a good idea.
I would say that I'm going to be preaching what I don't practice yet because we're a bit busy at the moment. But if you can, I would try and build your project in Swift 3, use the migrator, see how far it gets. It's not too late to file radars or Swift bug reports where there are problems and get them sorted before you really need it. So I wouldn't be really trying to run with Swift 3 on your main projects at the moment. But if you can just get it building and see what doesn't work, it give you a useful heads up, or you can talk to the guys and get something changed.
I would add, start to be cautious about what pods you include or what external dependencies you have. It's generally good practice anyway, but if you are including a pod, for example, which hasn't been updated for 9 months and has 12 outstanding issues, it's unlikely or potentially unlikely that anyone will convert that up to Swift 3. So it may become a problem at some point. Obviously, if your project's not going to be around then who cares? But if you want that ongoing reliance, I would start keeping an eye out for that.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. One of the curiosities is that, especially if you've got pods that are more UI-based, if you actually rely on Objective-C code, it will actually keep working. Whereas if you're relying on Swift stuff and it's not maintained, then all of a sudden you've got a massive pain. So that's a curious one. So I've had that with a project I'm working on. Swift updates and all the Objective-C dependencies are just like, great, keeps working. And then other bits, it's just like,
So yeah, I'd recommend converting all your Swift 2 code to Objective-C in advance of Swift 3. Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Okay, so next is question Swift Package Manager versus Cocoa Pods. The epic battle. I suppose first question is anybody using Swift Package Manager? Is anyone in the audience using Swift Package Manager? No. Well, I think that indicates the question is...
I think it is it's Swift 3 only, and I think it makes a lot of sense if you are doing that server-side stuff, from what I gather. But I don't think it's where you should be for iOS apps at this point, from what I understand. That might change, but I think that's where we are now.
I'm guessing we're generally talking about production rather than sort of side toy projects. I would do a shout-out from 2 months ago, the Swift IBM guys. IBM are starting to collate Swift projects which will work with Swift Package Manager. So if you are going to try it out, it's worth having a look at that and seeing if someone has opened their library up to that. Let's have a look. We have a question at the bottom here you might not be able to see. Biggest like/dislike about Swift?
So we've been sort of doing vertical slices of transforming Objective-C to Swift recently. And one of the things has just been, in terms of likes, has just been because the language is so expressive, you can just remove very large amounts of code. So just the compactness of the code. And with Swift 3, that looks like it, because everything's shorter, then method names are shorter, and it's sort of more expressive in that way. That should continue. So that would be the biggest like about it.
Obviously, the type safety that Swift gives you is a big plus in my book. Being able to rely on the compiler to catch things well in advance of runtime is obviously really useful, also for things like phantom types. In terms of dislikes, I really don't like implicitly unwrapped optionals. I know they're kind of a necessary evil at the moment working with storyboards and iOS in general.
I would definitely say the first language I learned was Ruby, and there's a real emphasis in there that your code should read like English, it should read like prose. And I think Swift is starting to move towards that. Again, it was covered in the API design guidelines talk, but Swift is a language where you can, to some extent, write it and someone non-technical can read it. I think that's great for readability and great for developer experience. We spend most of our time reading code, not writing it.
Probably same as Dan, the type safety stuff is really good. Maybe the dislikes is that there is quite there's perhaps a battle with the frameworks and Swift to a certain extent, because obviously there's a heritage of Objective-C. So I know core data has been updated. I've not really looked at it yet, but core data is one of those things that really didn't fit in with Swift. Things like storyboards, they're all kind of very stringly typed sort of things, which is a bit of a pain. Then you have to have your often implicitly unwrapped optionals or optional variables when you just want to pass things in. If you're using storyboards, that becomes a bit of a horror. So, I think it's, yes, Swift and the old frameworks is a bit of it's going to take years to iron out all the wrinkles, I think.
I'm mostly going to agree with what's already been said. I mean, the type safety and actually optionals are great, but the reason they're great is because other things can be non-optional. You don't want to be using optionals. They are just what allows other things. But the problem is, when you're interfacing with Interface Builder, we don't actually use any implicitly unwrapped. We go optional all the way and optionally unwrap it as we go. So you don't have to do the implicitly unwrapped optional. There are trade-offs, but it is more hassle doing those things. You gain the type safety, but there is that hassle integrating with Interface Builder.
Okay, next question. Quite a nice, simple yes or no. Can I submit apps? Can I submit an app to the App Store built with Swift Free? I confess I don't know the answer to this.
I don't think so.
Certainly not officially.
No.
Whether you can hack it so that you can build it with Xcode 8 and then you can sign it with Xcode 7 in some way, but I wouldn't try it.
Someone should try it.
It'll probably be, typically they open up for iOS 10 submissions early September, a week before iOS 10 is going to ship. And that's when you'll be able to build with Xcode 8 and ship to the store with it.
Cool. Another question. Swift versus Python on the Raspberry Pi or any other microcontroller. Now I'm going to show my ignorance here again. I have no idea. Has anyone given any work with the Raspberry Pi? No?
Done a tiny bit of reading. My guess is at this point Swift will be immature there.
Yeah.
It'll probably work, but there's probably more documentation, more libraries, more support, more things around Python. But in the longer term, especially if you're building on something else, compiling for the device, I'd have thought not having the Python interpreter in the way should mean it will work quite well and fast. But I think you're in for some hard work for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've not tried it either, but I know it is possible. Certainly the intention for Swift is that it can run on very minimal hardware, and that's kind of one of the design goals, that it can run from anything from there to very high-level application development. So, yeah, it seems to be where they want it to go.
I suppose the only thing I'd add is it depends what you want to get out of it. If you want to be an early adopter who writes the first blog post about putting Swift on the Raspberry Pi, then do it. If you want something which has lots of tutorials and explanations, use Python. Next would be, how do you mock dependencies in Swift?
Protocols. Don't have a specific struct or class type where you think you need to mock it. Always have a protocol that you have a live implementation of, and you can insert a test implementation.
And that's also just will help you generally with good practice if you've got a dependency, again, on a library that you want to switch out at some point. Having that wrapped in a protocol will make it easier for you to do that. It encourages best practice.
Yeah, I mean, that is the real way to do it. Obviously, use protocols and write your own mocks, roll your own. There are other options, I think. There's a library that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head, but it does a lot of code generation, basically, to be able to mock out existing classes. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. Probably not. I don't like generated code so much, but it's an option. One thing that could eventually come out is a nice hygienic macro system. If we get something like that, then you would be able to write code that essentially subclasses existing classes and injects mock data and so on. So that could be something down the line.
Sort of related. A while ago, I saw an interesting Scala talk, which was basically the topic of mocks and stubs are like the evil of the world. So that's kind of an interesting perspective in that if you're using lots of mocks and stubs, you've probably got side effects distributed all the way through the code. Obviously, there's certain areas, if you do networking, you can't escape. But it was a really intriguing talk about trying to get pure functions everywhere and just having the side effects very limited, so you have to have fewer kind of pretend things to deal with to test. So, I'll try and dig that out, and if anyone's vaguely interested, I'll point you in that direction.
Cool. Another question, Swift free release, does that mean the death of Objective-C? Dun, dun, dun.
I don't think so. I think the marginalisation possibly, but there's a lot of companies who have had an app in the store for a very long time. They've got Objective-C code that they're happy with, that they doesn't necessarily need to change, or that they'll only need to change in small bits. So I think for people coming in and starting and making a new app, or for small independent developers, it might mean that. But I think there's enough companies out there who will be reluctant to change just yet.
Yeah, Objective-C will be around for many, many years, so don't worry about it going anywhere. But it has amazed me how quickly Swift has actually evolved since the first release 2 years ago. So it's clearly the one to get on board with, and I would start any new project in Swift, obviously.
I suppose because with apps, they're not necessarily huge projects, so maybe that's part of the thing that people have either introduced Swift or rewritten in Swift, whereas Apple have got like 20 years worth of code in Objective-C, so I don't think they're going to kill it anytime soon, otherwise everything will stop working.
And with the Swift 3, they were planning to lock down the ABI, the binary interface for Swift, which would enable binary libraries in Swift to be distributed and useful for more than just a specific compiler version, but that didn't happen. They postponed that. So anyone shipping closed source libraries basically can't use Swift until they do that. So on top of the other things, that's a real limit on that whole sector. I know it's not a huge sector for iOS, but it's a big issue for Apple and for some people who sell libraries.
I think it's interesting because if someone who was starting out on iOS had asked me a year ago, what should I learn? Then I probably would have said you need to know how to write both. Now I'd probably start to say, again, if you're working on new projects, you need to know how to write Swift and read Objective-C to some extent. But generally, so much of it is understanding the framework, that the language almost becomes trivial to pick up once you understand how Cocoa works. Has anyone got any experience of migration to Swift free? Any battle scars? Very fresh battle scars yet?
I tried the auto migration tool, but there was a lot. There was a lot to still happen. So I wouldn't expect it to just work. I'd go that far.
Yeah, I'd say the exact same. I ran the auto migration tool, and then I think since then made 116 commits, and now it compiles. It's lots of like find and replace. It replaced all of because now enum cases are lowercased, so it replaced all of my declarations of enums with lowercase, but it didn't replace all of my uses of those enums with lowercases. So things like, I don't know if the migrator like got stuck halfway and then just bailed, but it's a lot of manual stuff. So try to run it and then file radars for things that don't work.
That migrator, I think, might have got stuck for me halfway as well. You got 116 commits further than me, so.
I've transferred a relatively small project, and for me the enum thing worked both ways, but I ran into a ground with sort and sorted, which have been renamed in a way that the automatic migrator doesn't pick up. So other than that, it's been relatively smooth sailing with my own stuff. I tried to migrate some of Apple's sample code, which was not so successful. So it might depend on your coding style and your platform. But yes, my desktop projects, anything I've written, I've opened, and it just says, oh, do all of this stuff, and I say, okay, and apart from sorting, that was it.
I think I opened it in a project, quite a large project, and Xcode just crashed immediately. So that's as far as I got.
I haven't put the time into trying Swift 3 yet. There is Swift 2.3 that ships with Xcode 8 as well. So you can ship iOS 10 features without upgrading. Even that has some migration stuff, mostly just library null status, nullability has been further audited. So I got that building. It wasn't actually running, but it built and then crashed. But and that is more plausible. I don't think with Swift 3 you will be able to have any sizable app that builds both under Swift 3 and under Swift 2 at the same branch. With Swift 2.3, you can use the hash if Swift greater than things around enough parts that you should be able to get it building, both with Swift 2.2 for shipping now and Swift 2.3 for getting ready for iOS 10 and things. Anything sizable, I think on Swift 3 that would be implausible.
Just to end on a slightly more hopeful note, although the migration tool is not working very well now, in theory, a lot of this can be done automatically. So there should be a lot of fixes that can just be done automatically. It shouldn't be too onerous.
Cool. I think we've got time for one more question before we head to the pub. Just because this one's on a slightly different note, if you're aiming for a career as an iOS contractor, we've got contractors on the panel, should you work as a permanent employee first for a few years, or can you dive straight into contracting? What did you guys do?
Yeah, I worked as a permanent employee for a couple of years writing Flash. And then Steve Jobs got on a stage and said it was dead. And then a couple of days later, someone called me and asked me if I knew an iOS developer. And I just said yes and said it was me. That was a lie. It was wrong of me. But I just sort of explained to them that I'd just been looking into it. I didn't have much experience and that I was willing to sort of do the learning aspect of the work in my own time and just charge them for what I thought was sort of reasonable progress, which was enough to tide me over until I had learnt it. I think possibly, though, that was very different times. So I think now it might be a good idea, just really to get a grounding in the language as well. So one of the important things, obviously, is working in a team and being able to write code that other people can read, going through the code review process. And I think it would be useful to do that as a sort of a junior before turning up. And if you're a contractor, you're expected to turn up on day one and know what you're doing, really. So I think, yes, it would be useful.
Speaking of turning up on day one and getting on with it, I also kind of lied about being an iOS developer when I took my first contract. I'd done it, but it was not my main thing. So my first day was, something to do with a tab bar controller, and I had no idea what I was doing. But what I would say is, you're never going to be totally ready. You're never going to know everything. So it's better to jump and leap and just dive in and get on with it, and you will learn very quickly that way.
For myself, I basically created an app that was in the App Store. That was in Objective-C and still is. It's kind of slightly scary to look at now, so I update it every now and then. And then from attending meetups, meeting people, and speaking to them, giving a few talks, so I got contract work doing it that way. So.
Yeah, I did my own app for a bit, or a couple of apps, and then I was looking for work or contracts, and first thing I got was a contract for someone trying to start a new startup. It was a shopping app with a tight deadline, and I said, yeah, I can do it. And it went okay. But now I'm in a permanent job. I mean, there are a lot of advantages to a permanent job. You get to work on the same consistent things, you get to work with people, you get to learn from people in ways that you don't necessarily do as a contractor. You don't have to be constantly looking for that next job, but it doesn't pay as much as if you have got those jobs lined up and you can get them. So it's very much a contacts business, I think, contracting, but either can work.
For what it's worth, I would say it depends what your goals are. So my background is I attended a web development bootcamp, got a job at a startup where I accidentally ended up doing iOS development. Happy accident. After 6 months, I contracted. I contracted for about 6-7 months and then went back to working full-time on a permanent basis. The reason I went back to full-time work was because I wanted to be somewhere where people had an investment in my long-term development. As a contractor, you are there to deliver something and deliver something as quickly and cheaply as possible. The quality is up to you. I wanted to be at a company that would hold me to standards and that would invest in my learning, that would teach me, that would mentor me, that would guide me. So yeah, it completely depends what you want to do. Depending on your experience, you probably could get contracting work if you talk to the right people and make the contacts and get out there. But it depends what you want to get out of it.
Yes, I'd just kind of second that and say that if you're contracting, the responsibility of keeping up to date and learning, it then becomes you, and you have to do that in your spare time. So it's going to take a lot more time to do that. On top of that, you've got to do your own accounts and things like that. So you're not in a 9-to-5. If you're not in a 9-to-5 contract, you've got a lot of other things to do on top of that, and bear that in mind when you look to move. Whether you want to do those things really, and also whether you're the kind of person that's going to keep their accounts up to date. Because if you're not, it's a bad idea.
Awesome. Well, I think it's time for the pub. I'm ready for a drink. I don't know if you guys are. My colleague Sarah, who is at the back there, waving merrily, will be guiding us to the pub. We'll be going to the Crown and Shuttle. It is a short walk away, about 10 minutes, but it's a nice day and it's not raining. I'm just going to put the map up on the screen. But yeah, hopefully you'll all join us in the pub afterwards. I'd like to say a really big thank you to all the panelists and to our speakers as well. Thank you all.